Hi, welcome to Lesson 8, Session 2, reading and writing reading a decimal in word form. So today we're going to be talking primarily about word form. So today we will show you what we understand when decimals are written in different forms. We'll look at standard form, word form, and expanded form, but we're really going to be concentrating today on word form. We're going to be on pages 149 through 154 in our Ready Math workbook. So go ahead and take out your Ready Math workbook and turn to page 149. All right, so we're going to go ahead and read and try to solve the problem below. It says, Josh uses a kitchen scale to weigh some blueberries. The blueberries weigh this amount. I don't want to say it out loud, just because I don't want to give you the answer. This much of a pound. Josh's mom wants to know how much the blueberries weigh. How does Josh say how much the blueberries weigh? So remember, we have the three questions we're going to ask ourselves. What is the problem about? What are we trying to find out? And what information is important? So first of all, this problem is about the weight of some blueberries. That's what we need to know, okay? And what are we trying to find out? Josh's mom wants to know how much the blueberries weigh. How does Josh say how much the blueberries weigh? So this is, there's kind of a lot that we're really trying to find out, but ultimately what we want to know is how much do the blueberries weigh? In order to know that, we need this important information. The blueberries weigh this much of a pound. So we need to figure out, how do we say this much of a pound? So we practiced two different ways that we could say that much of a pound yesterday, back on page 145. So right now I want you to pause and I want you to either go back to page 145 and look at the two methods that we used and then pick your favorite or do them both, or find a different way that you know how to say this value. Go ahead and pause your video now. Okay. Hopefully you paused. If not, go back and pause right now. Okay. So we've got, I'm going to go ahead and do it two ways like I did last time. So the first way is the way that I tend to always go to first, which is drawing my place value chart. I just love using the place value chart. I think that this is a really effective way to see what your place value is. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Look at this. This is like a pretty sorry looking rectangle, but it still works. Then we're going to fill in all of our digits, including remembering the row or the column for our decimal point. So we have a 0, we have a decimal point, we have a 6, another 0, and a 4. Then we're going to go back and fill in our place values. We know that the ones is always to the left of the decimal point. And then all of our fractions or anything less than a whole is going to be to the right of the decimal point. And we start with remember the ones are the middle, and then we kind of fan out from the ones. So we have our tenths, our hundredths, and our thousands. Remember that THS is the most important part at the end of each of those words. So now we know that we have 6 tenths, 0 hundredths, and 4 thousandths. But remember, when we're looking at this, we think of all of these numbers together, and then we use our smallest place value. So we have how many all together? We know that we have 600, and then we have no hundreds? So we have no hundredths, excuse me. But so we have 6, or in this case, if we're thinking of this as a whole, I take that back. If we're thinking of this as 604, we have nothing here. So we're not going to say any number in the middle. Then we're just going to say this 604. Sorry about that, guys. So 604, and then what is our smallest place value? Thousandths. So we would say that Josh's mom has 604 thousandths of a pound of blueberries. Now, the other way that might be better for your brain is to do it in fraction form. So if we know that we have 604 thousandths, we know that this 4 is in the thousandths place. So that's going to make our denominator 1,000 because this 4 is in the thousandths. And then when we think of, switch colors, this all together, we have 604 thousandths. So if we look at it as a fraction, 604 thousandths, just knowing how to say it, I feel like sometimes the fraction way is the easiest way to know how to write the words because it just makes sense. Because when you say the fraction, I've never heard anybody say the fraction wrong. So this is 604 thousandths. So we would write that as this: 604. That takes care of the 604. And then we say thousandths. We know that we have 604 thousandths. Awesome. All right, go ahead and turn the page to page 150. Now, page 150, it has the same problem that we just did, but they did it a couple of different ways. So I want to go through what they did, and then we'll go back over to this next page. So it says you can use place value understanding to write the expanded form of 604 thousandths. You can then write the number as a fraction. So with decimals, we can look at this as 604 is the thousandths is the same as 6/10 plus 4 thousandths. We have no hundredths, so you don't need to write anything there. You can just write your 6/10 and your 4 hundredths, which is also the same as 6 times 1/10 plus 4 times 1/1000th. Now with fractions, we can write 604 thousandths as 6 times 1/10 plus 4 times 1/1000th because we have 6/10 and we have 4/1000ths, or 6/10 plus 4/1000ths. 6/10 is the same as 600 thousandths. In case you were wondering how we did that, you can add a 0 to both the top and the numerator and the denominator, and you're still making the same fraction. You're just making it a bigger. You're just making it a bigger equivalent fraction. So 6/10 is the same as 60 hundredths, which is the same as 600 thousandths. We just have, we're just adding a few zeros to make it equivalent so that we have common denominators so we can add them together. We'll get to common denominators later on in 5th grade, so don't worry if that doesn't make any sense to you today. So we have 600 thousandths plus 4 thousandths, which gives us the total of 604 thousandths. So that is one way that we could figure out how to say that decimal. Also, this is the method, one of the methods we used on the previous page. You can write 604 thousandths in a place value chart to show the place value of each digit, which we did. Then we recognize that the least place value of 604 thousandths is in the thousandths place. So we then think about this number as a whole number, and we get 604 thousandths because the thousandths is in the last place. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next page. I'm going to zoom out a bit so that you can see the two pages together. Hopefully you will be able to see the words well enough. Let me see if I can zoom in just a hair more. All right, I think that'll be okay. All right, so number 1 says, look at the place value chart. What are the names of the 4 place values in 0 and 604 thousandths? Now notice that they said 4. The 4 place values. It's very important that even though this 0 doesn't have a digit greater than 0, it doesn't have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, it is still a really important placeholder because that's telling us that we have 0 wholes. There's nothing greater than 1 in this decimal. So this place value, even though it's a 0, is still very important. So the names of the 4 place values are our ones, our tens, our tenths. See, even I catch myself. Our ones, our tenths, our hundredths, and our thousandths. So you can go ahead and write all of that down. Once, once. See, I even told, now I'm even saying once. Ones, tenths, and remember, I like to underline the THS so that we remember to write it because that is very important because that tells us it's a decimal, it's a part of a whole. It's not a whole. Now, which of these place values has the least value? You're always going to find the least value looking for the digit that is as far right as they get. Okay, so the last digit in the right. Even if this were a 0, if this were a 0 and they wrote it in the place value, that would mean that it's important and that they want you to recognize it. So whatever digit is in the least place value or all the way to the right is going to be the place value that has the least value. So in this case, it is the thousandths. Now we're going to look at the expanded form with fractions. So how many, and this is kind of a trick question, so I want you to really think about it. How many thousandths are there all together? That's the giant word there in 604 thousandths. How many are there all together? I want you to write it down right now. All right. How many of you said 4? I hope none of you. But if you did, 4 is not the right answer. 4 is in the thousandths place. You are correct. But that's not telling you how many thousandths there are. That's just telling me what number is in the thousandths place. When we are looking at all together, that means we need to look at this number all together. So how many thousands are there all together in 604 thousandths? There are 604 thousandths. So I wasn't kidding when I said I was being a little bit of a trick. It was a little tricky because we are so used to just talking about place value, but today we're talking about how many there are all together. Now, if we're looking at 604 thousandths, what is the word form of 604 thousandths? And so we actually wrote that on the last page, on page 149, but we would write it as, first we say the 604. So we write 604 because that tells us this 604. Now, if I left this alone, that would mean that we have 604 wholes. It would be like saying we had 604 of something, but we don't. We don't even have one of something because we have 604 thousandths, which is not even one whole. So we cannot forget to write what our place value is, the least place value. So the least place value is in the tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So we need to write thousandths. And then underline that THS so we don't forget it. So we've got 604 thousandths. Now, what would happen if we put a 1 before that 604 thousandths? Now, how would we write this in word form? Well, first we have to recognize that there's a 1. So we're going to write the word 1. Then we need to write a word that means a decimal point. What word was it that I told you mean a decimal point? There's a word that you can use in place of a decimal point. That's right, the word and. Anytime you write the word and in word form, that tells me that there's a decimal point there. So you have some wholes and some part. So we have 1 and 604. 604 thousandths. And don't forget to underline that thousandths. So this part of the decimal stayed the same. This 604 thousandths. We just added this 1 and because we added 1 whole to 604 thousandths. So explain how reading the digits to the right of the decimal point. So all of these digits to the right, this is the right of the decimal point. And knowing the name of the least place value, in this case it's thousandths, help you read a decimal number. Use the examples 604 and 1 and 604 thousandths and 1 and 604 thousandths in your explanation. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on this because I want to read to you what I wrote and then I want you to be able to copy that down. So it says, the least place value is the thousandths. The digits after the decimal point tell you how many of those smallest units, or those thousandths, there are. In 604 thousandths, there are 604 thousandths. In 1 and 604 thousandths, there is 1 whole and 604 thousandths. To read 1 and 604 thousandths, you would say 1 and 604 thousandths. Go ahead and pause the video now and finish writing that down so that you have those math notes in case you need to reference them later. All right, if you didn't get that all written down, please pause the video and write it down. Otherwise, you're going to go on. Look back at your Try It strategies by classmates and model it. Which models or strategies do you like best for reading a decimal? Explain. So my favorite strategy to read a decimal is 2, and then I want you to go ahead and fill out what is your favorite strategy to read a decimal. And write it down here and let me know. Okay, go ahead and turn to page 152. On page 152, we're going to practice writing the word form of each decimal, but we're not going to necessarily have the same form of the decimal to learn how to write the word form. So the easiest time, I think that the easiest way to write the word form is when you have the number written in standard form. That means that this number is just written, this decimal is just written as a decimal. I think that the easiest way to hear how to say the word is to put it into a fraction. So if I had 0 decimal point 374, I know that the place value of this 4 is my tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So the least place value is thousandths. So my denominator is going to be thousandths. Then I look at my whole number all together and I see 374. Once I have the fraction written, I can just say it out loud. 374 thousandths. And then I can write it in word form. 374 thousandths. And don't forget to underline that THS. Now, I'm not worried if you don't know how to spell all of those words. As long as I can read it and it's close, I'm fine. What I'm mostly looking at is to make sure that you understand that in this case, this 374 all goes together, and that the number in the least place value is thousandths. So we know that our place value, the word in word form, is going to be thousandths. 374 thousandths. Now on number 8, it says a number is written in expanded form as 7 times 10 plus 5 times 1/10 plus 1 times 1/100th plus 6 times 1/1000th. So, and then we want to know what is the word form of this number. Now I'm going to tell you, I cannot look at that right now the way it is and know how in the world to write this number in word form. I have to do something first. What I need to do is find out what this looks like in standard form as a decimal. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to write my my decimal. And then I'm going to put my ones place next to it because I always have a ones place next to my decimal. And then I'm going to come look over here at this number and go, okay, I have 7 times 10. That means that I have a 7 in the tens place. Now, I didn't draw a line for the tens place, but I'm going to draw it right now. So I'm going to zoom out so it stops, hopefully stops zooming in and out on us. So if I have a 7 in the tens place, I know that this is my ones and this is my tens. So I'm going to put a 7 in my tens place. Now, do I have a number in my ones place? I don't. If I had a number in my ones place, then next we would see something like 5 times 1. But instead we see 5 times 1/10. So that means that there's no number in the ones place. So what do you think we should put there? Because we have to put something there. That's right, a placeholder 0. That placeholder 0 is going to be very, very, very important when we are working with decimals. Next, we're going to see what our next place value is that we need to draw. So we have 5 times 1/10. So we know we have a 10th. How many tenths do we have? We have 5. Then we have 1 times 1/100th. So we know we have 100th. And how many do we have? 1. And then we have 6 times 1/1000th. So we know we have 1,000th and we have 6 of them. So we have 70 and this part here. This is where, so we know the 70. That's the easy part. So let's go ahead and write 70. We know we have 70. And then we know that what word stands for decimal? That's right, and. Okay, that's the fairly easy part because we know this is 70 and this is and. Now, again, we have to do the same thing. We need to look at the least place value. In this case, again, it is tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So we know it's going to be in thousandths. And then we're going to see how many of those thousandths we have all together. And in this case, we have 516. So we're going to write and, see, look at me. I started to write the number 5, but that's not in word form. Word form, I need to write 500 and then 16. And then don't forget, because if I said 70 and 516, that wouldn't make sense. I still need that last word that's very important that tells us our least place value, which is thousandths. So this whole thing written in standard form is here, but written in word form is 70 and 516 thousandths. 70 and 516 thousandths. Finally, we're going to go ahead and write this giant number here in word form. So first, we're going to look at what comes before the decimal, what we see before the decimal. So we see an 8 in the hundreds, a 0 in the tens, and a 7 in the ones. We're going to think of those all together because they all come together before the decimal point. How would we say that out loud? 807. So we're going to write 807. And then there is a decimal point there. I kind of drew over it with my circle. So we need a word that means the decimal point. That word is, that's right, and then we're going to look at everything that comes after the decimal. And then remember to make note of what is the least place value. So we have 807 and then here we have a 0 in the tenths, a 5 in the hundredths, and a 7 in the thousandths. But when we look at this number all together, we have 57. So we have 807 and 57, but it doesn't make any sense unless we add that place value at the end. So we need to remember to look at what is the least place value, and we have that our least place value is tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So we're going to write thousandths. And like I always say, underline that THS to make sure that you made a point that it said thousandths. So finally, this giant number in word form would be 807 and 57 thousandths. That tells us that if we were to write this back into standard form, we would have 807 means we have 3 digits because we have 807. Then we have our decimal point, which means is and then we know it's going to be thousandths. If it's going to be thousandths, we know that we need 3 place values because we have tenths, hundredths, and thousandths. Now, here's the one that's kind of tricky when you're writing it the other direction. If we say 57, we can't put the 5 here and the 7 here because if we did, we wouldn't have a number in the thousandths. So we need to take this 57 and push it as far over as we can and still end up in the thousandths place. But then we can't leave this empty. We have to put something there. What goes there? That's right, a placeholder 0. So now what I'd like for you to do is go ahead and complete pages 153 and 154 on your own. As always, if you have any questions, you can email your teacher. See you soon.